I'm Tim Langston with Red Dog Bushcraft, and I was tagged by Mr. William Collins of the attributes that I look for in a bushcraft knife versus a survival knife. So we're going to get started and dive into that right now. Stay with me. So bushcraft, what is bushcraft? To me, bushcraft is going out in the outdoors, a planned trip to spend time out there, and I use that opportunity to craft things that make my camp more comfortable. So when I travel out, I usually go with an axe, some type of a breakdown saw, whether it be some type of a bow saw or a folding saw, and I take some specialty tools along with me because I'll be doing things like carving tent stakes, making some cups or bowls, maybe some spoons, or maybe something as simple as a combination spoon spatula that I use when I'm cooking. So when I do that, I'm looking at some specialty knives, and a couple that I have here in this roll, and I'll just go through a couple of them that I find that are quite handy. One, anytime people start talking about bushcraft, you're going to have more come up, and you hear this a lot. For the price, you can't beat a Moore knife. And this Moore clipper is like the one that I started out with. I've worn the original down to the point that I invested in a new one. But it's really not the price. The price makes it very affordable, but the knife is made for crafting. It's thin enough that you can get in and do some carving, but it has a size that's it lends itself well to working wood, both green and dry. It has a Scandinavian grind, and it has a nice tip that allows you to get in and work wood. So taking the price out of it for function, I think it's hard to beat a Moore, and there's several different styles and varieties and thicknesses out there, both in stainless steel and high carbon steels, that lend themselves very well. I also utilize some specialty knives like this one, the hook or hawkbill, and I have those in both the one that I just showed and an old folder here, and the folders come in nice for small and packability. Also have some small folders that I use for carving wood. This is just an open L, and they have several different sizes of this. High carbon steel, which has advantages. You can strike your ferro rod with the back of them. It's a good straight striker. You can also use it for using with rocks. Flint works really well to throw sparks to start charred material on fire. A couple other specialties that I carry. This is a small gouge, and that comes in very handy for the cups and the spoon type works. And of course your spoon knives. And I have a variety of different spoon knives, but the idea behind that is to find one that is of the right size for the projects that you want to do. These are just some Moras. Once again, it's a high carbon steel, and they give you the opportunity to, with ease, working on a spoon, to carve out those bowls, and they come in very handy for that. When it comes to my belt knife or my sheath knife, other than the Mora, I like a traditional bushcraft knife. This is the Genesis by LT Wright. You notice the point on this, where the point is in line with the handle, and that comes in, or the scales as it comes up through the handle, and that's nice for getting down and doing some finer work, but yet it works good for cooking and butchering game, and it will serve your needs while you're out in the bush very well. Moving on from that, you can get a nice everyday carry knife, in a Scandinavian grind that will also lend its well for both camp tasks and for doing your woodworking. This one was made by Battle Horse Knives before the company split, and this is the workhorse. Full tang construction, a nice sharp 90-degree spine on the back for both helping to smooth out your woodworking projects. After you finish carving, you may want to get down there and do some fine work with the back of that scraper, like a cabinet scraper, to reduce the sanding if you're going to sand your projects. Like I said, full tang construction. This one has bolt-on scales, so it's really a kicked up version of a small, lightweight bushcraft knife. And in blade length, I like something that's about the width of my hand plus just a little bit. So this makes a very comfortable belt knife to use in an everyday carry situation, but also lends itself well to working wood. And the ultimate that I have here, this knife is in a dangler sheath. This one was also made by LT.Wright, and believe it or not, this was a knife that was made from a piece of steel that was actually designed to be another knife. And I was able to pick this up at one of their sales, and for an affordable price. So depending on your price point, with the Mora and the folding knife of the French-made knife, and also the Hawkbill, which was bought second hand, the Opinel being the other folding knife, and they're pretty inexpensive, on up to a custom knife like this. And I really like my custom knife, and it's because it gives me a lot of versatility in both survival and in bushcraft. It's of a thick enough blade design, which I would say something more than 1/8 of an inch. It's in a kind of like a French trade knife pattern. The scales are contoured and they fit your hand very well, so that your hand doesn't slip off the back and it doesn't go forward. Once again, in a Scandinavian grind, which is consistent with the thickness of the blade. So depending on the angle of the Scandinavian grind will determine if that knife wants to dig in and really hog off a lot of wood, or if it wants to stay more shallow. Now, a lot of that can be determined by the skill of the user, but looking at the grind, the higher the grind is, the easier it is to take off smaller amounts of wood. The thicker the grind, the more tendency it has to hog down or to bite down into the wood. This blade is quite a bit longer than my hand, which gives you some more versatility in shelter building and such. But the thickness of the blade also lends itself well to where you can baton on the back of this, and baton to both cut down or cut through thicker material as well as splitting that material. Like I said, I try to carry an axe, but when you're blending that survival and bushcraft knife, having the ability that if the need arises that you can do that can be very important. A good point that is strong is important for both aspects when you start putting a little bit more work, hard work, into the knife so that you don't chip that blade. This particular knife is in 01 tool steel, and I like 01. The D2 of the Genesis works really well also. Let's talk a little bit about the sheath. In my bushcraft knives, I like to have a fire steel loop where I can keep my fire steel with me. I believe in a layering system, so this is not my only fire steel, but I think it's advantageous to have a fire steel on your knife and to have that 90-degree spine so that you can use that as a scraper for your fire steel. Having a simple lanyard system on it that will retain it in the sheath is nice. I like the tradition of leather for my bushcraft, and I like the wet format so it has good retention. It snaps in and out. And I also like the dangler sheath. That allows me to wear this knife when I'm wearing outer garments that may cover my knife if it's up on a belt. It keeps me from having to pull my coat up and pull the knife out, and minimizes the chance of you cutting your clothing. The sheath being fit and having a good quality sheath that your knife stays secure and it's not going to wear out quickly is something that really needs to be addressed in a bushcraft knife, because this is something you're going to be working with quite a bit. And anytime you finish working with your knife, you should resheath it for safety. So you want something that you can get that knife in and out of that sheath easily. So that's just a couple of aspects and a few of the tools that I use for bushcraft. Okay, so let's switch hats here for a minute and let's talk about survival knives. And kind of like the moral when you're talking about bushcraft, they just go hand in hand. I really can't start a conversation about survival knives, and the first thing that comes to my mind is the old US K-bar. This is the USMC K-bar fighting utility knife, and it has been tried and true through the US military for a lot of years. And it's a good functional knife for everyday uses, from opening up boxes and pallets to warfare and fighting. What makes this knife good for that, what we're looking at, is a blade of good thickness. It is tapered on the top and the tip is upswept, which makes it good for stabbing and slashing. The scales, or the handle of this knife, is not round, it's kind of egg-shaped, and that gives you a nice grip in many different configurations or hand holding options that may come into play during battle. It also has this guard up front which prevents your hand from sliding forward, and it has a pommel on the back which not only is good for hitting and crushing things, but it also acts as a retention of keeping your hand from sliding off the back when you're in the mud and the blood. Blood groove cut across the top, very hard steel, but holds a good razor edge. This one is in a plastic well, it's some type of a molded plastic sheath, which I really like because it deploys very quickly, but yet it retains very well. It's not coming out of there. But with a simple press on either side, right here at the retention, the knife releases and it comes out fast. If you're talking about a fighting situation, you don't want to be fumbling around with something that's hard to draw the knife out. It's in a sheath that allows you to carry it in several different options. I've included a fire steel loop on mine, which just gives it a little bit more versatility. But when it comes to tried and true survival knives, the K-bar is a nice option. So let's go from the military to the civilian side, and let's talk a little bit about a big survival knife. Now this is the Habilis. This is the bush tool and has a Scandinavian grind, 1095 high carbon steel. The blade lends itself to many different hand positions. It's a good heavy knife that, I tell you what, it would take something to break one of these. Exposed pommel at the end, contoured handle once again, keeping your hand locked into it. A little bit of a thinner profile here. I like that. It fits my hand well. It allows you to choke up on it. You can beat this thing to death and she ain't going nowhere. The Scandinavian grind is higher on this knife because of the blade thickness, which lends itself to bushcraft or woodwork type material removal that could come in handy if you were having to build shelters or process firewood, and this was your only tool option that you would have with you. When we look at bushcraft, we think about having other tools, but in survival, only having one tool, it's important to have the most versatility that you can out of that. The knife that I've used more for survival schools, teaching, training, and work more than any other is the PLSK1. The Pathfinder Logo Series knives, this was designed by Dave Canterbury. It lends itself very well to bushcraft and survival. A very thick blade, 90-degree spine, full tang construction, nice molded scales that make it comfortable to work. Once again, it has a design that prevents your hand from sliding forward, but the scales actually get larger towards the rear that helps keep your hand from sliding back. A lanyard hole that also would allow you to put a lanyard to put that around your wrist. Once again, a Scandinavian grind, but for a one tool option, and I know a lot of people say there's no such thing as a one tool option, but the truth of the matter is your one tool is the one that you happen to have on you, so you should choose your knife that you strap on your side every day to be your one tool option if that's all you have. This one has a hybrid sheath which both has leather, which is nice for the comfort as far as the flexibility that it has on your belt, but it has a Kydex two-piece molded bottom of the sheath that has a lock that your knife can be held in there very tightly, but yet when you're using it, it comes in and out very easily. Like I said, being able to get that knife in and out of the sheath is critical, because a knife that's laying around is a dangerous knife and it needs to be resheathed anytime that it's not in use. Having that lock so that if you're performing some type of a task that's strenuous or puts you in awkward positions and that knife is inverted or you're going through rugged terrain, you don't have to worry about it coming out of that sheath. Once again, even on the survival knives, I like having that fire steel loop there that gives me the versatility of having a fire steel with me. With a cutting tool and fire being so critical, it only makes sense to me to have as many fire steels layered or fire starting implements layered in my system as possible. The sheath on this one also gives you the ability to have tools stored in the back, and in this one I have a smaller stainless steel knife that I try to keep that one pristine for my food work. So that's a very good option when it comes to survival knives. One of the others that I like, this one is in my get home bag or my everyday carry bag, stays in my vehicle, and this is the Mora survival knife. The knife that I bought with this one was in stainless steel, which is nice for a marine environment. And I like carrying high carbon steels a lot, both for bushcraft and survival. But sometimes in a marine environment, stainless steel has some nice features to it as far as the durability and lack of corrosion, or more corrosion resistant. This one came with several belt, or two different belt options. This one I used the closed system so that you don't have to worry about it coming off of your belt. Once again, it has the fire steel on it. The knife, the original stainless steel, is in another sheath. This is the Bushcraft Black. I just alternate the sheaths depending on the environment that I'm going to be in. Really nice blade profile, almost full tang construction, and I don't worry about this knife not being full tang because the materials they use to mold around this and the size of the tang that comes back into the material is of sufficient strength that I've never had an issue with any of these knives. Once again, Scandinavian high carbon steel Bushcraft Black knife, hard to beat. Those features once again about that sheath, easy to unsheath and sheath, so that is something that you, once again, you want to emphasize in a survival knife. So that's kind of the first thing that comes to mind in some of the knives that we use when we're training. But in my experience as a firefighter and doing rescue work, it's really not what I use most of the time for a survival knife. So give me just a minute to put a couple of these away, and I'll break out a couple of knives and show you what I used on a daily basis. Okay, rescue type operations and survival knives. So let's start off with some specialty knives. This particular knife is in stainless steel. This is a diver's knife. This is made to be strapped to your leg or up on your BC or your life vest. And it is very comfortable in the hand. It has a way of cutting webbing here. It has serrations at the bottom. Has a typical grind on the front with that upswept tip, which can come in very handy. It is in a sheath where it stays secured with a rubberized retention device, and you can understand the practicality of this if you're doing swift water rescue or some type of marine environment work, and if you or the person you were going to rescue was tangled in some type of webbing or rope or net, that you need to remove them from that. We all need air, and that's the reason we would carry a knife in those environments. Plus, sometimes you can get tangled in cords also, so you have to be able to self-rescue. A couple of the other knives that are specialty are folders. And I know that's not what the typical person thinks about when it comes to survival knives, but this is a knife that I use quite a bit during high angle rescue. It's small and lightweight, would fit in a pouch on a vest or a harness system, or mounted in a pocket because of the clip. It has an easy one-hand operation. It's in that hawkbill configuration, is serrated, and is made for cutting cordage. When you're in a rescue environment that's high angle, sometimes you have to cut that person out of their system once you secure them into your system, and you may have to cut their ropes or part of their gear to be able to perform that rescue. And that hawkbill makes that in a very smooth, one-handed, one-slash operation. It does it very well. It can cut through a lot of rope in one swipe. We also had that knife, the Spyderco knife, in a straight rather than a hawkbill, and we tried those to see how they work, and they both have their place in rescue. Another option you may not think of is something that I would carry on my belt quite often, and that is a switchblade. This one has a lock on it that prevents it from opening in your pocket, which is nice. It is an extra step, but you don't want a switchblade knife that is a push button and pop open to come open in your pocket and injure yourself during a rescue. This has no serrations on it, and the reason you may want a switchblade in a survival situation like that is you may be in a position to where you only have one hand, and you may not have the dexterity with gloves or other equipment to be able to do the thumb flip as easily as you might think, and a switchblade lends itself well to that. This also has a glass breaker on the end, comes in handy for vehicle rescue. And I have another one that I can't show you right now, but it's actually in my turnout gear, and I'm out on a hunt. But it has a place in the back that allows you to cut webbing or seatbelt material without ever opening the knife. So there is a whole nother subject matter of survival knives that we may not typically think of as a survival knife. Now, when it comes to some of the fast opening knives like this one, people may think of as self-defense. This is kind of a smaller version of a self-defense knife, but when it comes to the configuration for that, I want a thin blade with a drop down point, something that comes to a very significant point. I'm not going to be doing prying and cutting with this. It's made for self-defense. You want something that is much easier to penetrate clothing and other gear to get in and get that type of work done. I'm not real experienced in that, so maybe you'll look at some other people that have a little bit more experience in that. But the one that I carried every day, almost every single day when I worked, and this particular knife or tool has probably saved more lives in the fire rescue work than a lot of the other knives out there. I have nothing statistically to base that on. It's just my own personal experience, and being around rescue workers is a good quality multi-tool. Now, when I say good quality, there's a lot of multi-tools out there, but I chose Leatherman. I like the Leatherman Wave, the Rebar, and the Super Tool 100. I like the sheaths, number one, that they come with. They're very easy to open. It allows you to carry a fire steel on one side and an ink pen on the other, both of which rescue people can utilize. It's nice to have some way of starting a fire to be able to light your drip torches and stuff like that in wildland firefighting. It's nice to have an ink pen anytime you're in a command or taking notes or you're on an EMS call. But the real workhorse of the system is the tool itself. And having a good pair of pliers is a nice thing to have, and I used it a lot working around the firehouse. But having a saw, a file, a good quality blade, some screwdrivers, all of these tools were used on a daily basis around the firehouse and during operations. And I don't know how many times you'd be on a rescue and it was the quickest and easiest tool to use. It might not be the preferred tool or what you would really like to have in a perfect world, but it was so handy because I kept one on my belt when I was wearing my uniform, and I kept one on my turnout gear, so it was always right there at hand and got the job done many, many times. I can't imagine how many lives have been saved with a simple multi-tool. So it kind of depends on what you're talking about when it comes to a survival knife, what you might want to be looking at. Everyday carry. How many of us can walk around with a large knife on our side? But a multi-tool is very sociably acceptable and can get the job done if you're used to using it and you use it correctly. I understand that folding knives are not as strong as a full tang knife. I understand that it's a great point. But a lot of times in rescue work or in survival work, you don't really need that strength. You need something that's fast deploying and something that can get the job done. Cutting rope and cutting straps and webbing and cutting off a piece of plastic with a saw, that type of work that is the meat and potatoes of the rescue world. These Leathermans, they get the job done. And looking at the warranties and the manufacturer statements, do they stand behind their products? I've broken multi-tools. The last one I broke, I dropped it and it fell down in a piece of pipe and hit, and I told the company how I broke it, that it was no fault of their own. It was out of total abuse. I had one that was run over by a fire truck one time. They replaced it, fixed it, absolutely no issues, no questions about it. Just a simple thank you for choosing our tools. That's important. I don't care if you're talking about a big survival knife that you're going to take out or something as far as a multi-tool. Having those companies stand behind those products is something that you need to look at. So it can run the extreme. I had a missionary come back from Africa that brought me a very nice machete that is used by the indigenous people of Africa for everything. They use it from farming to food prep, to clearing property, to building shelters. they use it for everything. And the first thing they do when they get in country is they go to a local shop and they buy a locally made machete, and it stays with them every day, all day. And in the hands of someone who knows how to use that tool, even something as large as a machete can be a great tool for both your everyday work and a survival situation. The same thing when it comes to something as small as a folder or a multi-tool. In the hands of an experienced user, someone who uses the tool correctly, it's hard to beat. So there's just a couple of thoughts on the survival tools. Okay guys, there's just a few of my thoughts on bushcraft versus survival and what I look for, and even some different layerings no matter what you're doing as far as fine carving tasks or some pretty hard grunt work when you're out working on bushcraft, to light everyday survival type tools that you can carry right on up to the big boys. And there's a lot of options that I did not talk about. I'll post a couple of pictures at the end of the video of just some of the knives that I've worked with that I had a option to talk about, and I just tried to reduce it for this conversation so that it wouldn't draw out too long. But it's important for you to think about an everyday carry knife is going to be your survival knife. When we train people in survival, it's important for us to get people to understand that the tools that are attached to your body is truly going to be what you have in a survival situation. If you do case studies on people that have been caught in survival situations, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't layer your equipment, you should have many different layers, but most of the time they don't have time to grab bags and boxes of survival gear. What they have on their body when they bail out of that situation is what they're going to have to work with. Well, you too, every day when you leave your house and you go out into an environment, you don't know when that survival situation is going to pop up. At least that's not the norm. So the tool that you choose to buy should be something that you're willing to carry. Something that's comfortable, something that has durability, something that meets the needs of the area that you're going to be operating in. Whether you're buying a tool for a mission trip where you're going around the globe, or if you're buying a tool for using where you live and work every day. Having it on your body, strapped to your body, so that when the need arises, it's right there on you, is absolutely critical. Okay, that wraps it up for today. Thanks, William Collins, for tagging me in this video. I too will tag a couple of people following the video. Names will be on the screens. If you feel so inclined, please share with us your information on what you look for in a bushcraft versus a survival knife. This has been a very interesting thread, and I encourage you to go back and look at some of the other people and their thoughts, because there's a lot of great information out there. Until next time, I'm Tim Langston with Red Dog Bushcraft, home of global safety and survival. God bless.